Good morning, I'm Pat Thurston. My guest is Russ Baker. His book is Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. Hey, Russ, let's get another phone call on here, and then maybe we'll move into Watergate a little bit. But let's go first to Ismael in Santa Cruz. Ismael, hi, welcome to KGO.
Hi, how's it going?
Fine, thanks.
All right, I just wanted to get to it real quickly, but I kind of skipped out on a bit of the interview, but I was just wondering if it was a contention that Oswald wasn't actually involved in the shooting, or if he was, what was the Jack Ruby's involvement in the whole complicated scenario that he's kind of putting out there in his book.
Okay, thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that I don't consider myself an expert or a specialist in the Kennedy assassination. This is a book about the hidden history behind the rise of the Bushes and what this means in a more ongoing sense. I did end up almost kind of stumbling into the Kennedy aspect of this, and I tried to stay very much to parts of it that relate to the Bushes. But I will say that I've certainly looked into other aspects of this, and I think that Lee Harvey Oswald, my conclusion and that of other researchers increasingly, is that Lee Harvey Oswald was an intelligence officer of the United States, that he was sent to Russia in something as a false defector, but that he was a pawn in a much larger ongoing operation, that they frequently told people they were doing one thing and they were actually doing another, and that when he was in Dallas, I think he was told to go take a job in the book depository building, and I think he was set up. I do not believe that he was a shooter at all, and I think I know this is controversial, but there are a number of very, very fine books out in the last few years with all kinds of new documentation suggesting that he was not involved in the shooting at all.
And what about Jack Ruby?
Well, Jack Ruby was deeply involved with all kinds of things. In fact, very interesting that he actually had a connection to the House Un-American Activities Committee when Richard Nixon was on that. Jack Ruby was wired from the get-go. He even had ties to Oswald himself. He was tied to all of these people, and that's a whole other subject that's worthy of a book.
808-0810 is the telephone number, 8080-810. I am going to take one more short break here, and then we'll come back and we'll begin our discussion on a little bit more about Richard Nixon and about Watergate, and eventually we're going to get to George W., which is where we began. 808-0810, I'm Pat Thurston, Russ Baker, my guest. The book, Family of Secrets, and you're listening to KGO, News Talk 810. Good morning, I'm Pat Thurston. Russ Baker is my guest. The book, Family of Secrets. And let's start broaching a little bit more of Richard Nixon and Watergate. So Richard Nixon is in Dallas at the time of the assassination. He's scared, upset, concerned that he was put into that position when the assassination took place. And ostensibly, this gave greater control over Richard Nixon for having been there, that could have been made him look like he may have been a conspirator in the assassination?
Well, I think two things may have crossed his mind. One was that, and the second was simply that could have been a message to him.
Ooh, play ball.
Well, the bad things happen to people who don't
play
do
ball.
What they're supposed to be doing. Now, this is to provide context to this, I should say that I became interested in the Bush-Nixon connection because once I knew that H.W. Bush had this long-time past in intelligence operations, then everything he did in all of these periods were interesting to me. And when George H.W. Bush started rising rapidly in politics in the late 60s, he did it with the particular sponsorship of Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon gave George H.W. Bush more opportunities consistently than to anybody else. And so I thought, well, why is he doing that? And on the Nixon tapes, I actually found a reference where Nixon and Kissinger are discussing Bush, and they're sort of contemptuous of him as a lightweight. And so I think, well, wait a minute. Now, Nixon considers him a lightweight. He doesn't take him very seriously, but he keeps promoting him. Even when he's firing his cabinet, he keeps promoting H.W. And so I thought, why would he do that? Why would he do that? And he gives him all these positions that he wasn't qualified for him. He makes politics. Bush is in the House of Representatives. Then Nixon convinces him to run for the Senate in Texas a second time in 1970. He loses, and Nixon says, "Hey, listen, don't worry," and he appoints him the ambassador to the United Nations. Now, this is 1970. The whole world is in turmoil. I mean, and you're going to have the opening to China. You have the Vietnam War. You have conflicts going on in the Middle East. You have all of these big issues, and of all the people you would choose, you take a man who has no background in foreign affairs at all, and really no distinguished track record of any kind. So I thought, well, why is Nixon doing this? And I went back and I started thinking, when did the Bushes first connect with Richard Nixon? And this took me back through the 1960s, through the 1950s, all the way back to 1946. And what I discovered, like so many other things while I was researching Family of Secrets, was that I had the wrong impression from things, from all these books that we have on our shelves, biographies of Richard Nixon. They had the wrong story. They said that Richard Nixon got his start in politics because small-town businessmen sponsored him.
Okay, you have to hang on. Where Russ Baker continues with us. Russ Baker is the author of Family of Secrets. It's about the Bush dynasty, America's invisible government, and the hidden history of the last 50 years. I can see where you can embark on a discussion of this book, and you could probably be talking about it for a week and still not have covered everything. It's absolutely fascinating, everything that we've been talking about thus far. And I cut you off rather rudely at the as you were talking, because we had to go into the news, and we were talking about Richard Nixon. Do you remember where you left off?
Sure. I was saying that I was curious how George H.W. Bush managed to get Richard Nixon into a position where Nixon felt that he had to keep promoting him.
Right.
And so I looked all the way back through the years, and I got back to the beginning of Richard Nixon's political career in 1946, when he ran for the House of Representatives as an unknown. And, you know, if you read all of these conventional biographies by the top historians, they all say that Richard Nixon was chosen by local businessmen, sort of small businessmen in Whittier, California. And in fact, what I found was that the congressman in the district, a guy named Jerry Voorhees, was sort of, maybe you would say, the Henry Waxman or something of his day, and he was leading all these hearings on Capitol Hill, looking into the practices of the bankers, the Wall Street interests, the insurance companies, and so on. This was in the aftermath of the Great Depression, and he was concerned that there wasn't adequate regulation of all of these financial services. It was interesting how history repeats itself.
Right.
In any case, basically, Jerry Voorhees had gained the enmity of all of these powerful interests, Eastern interests, and they wanted him out. And we see right in that moment, Prescott Bush comes into Whittier, and he and his group are buying defense contractors in the area. And they actually, together with the Chandler family, they owned the LA Times, were in business together. And they appear to have been involved in choosing Richard Nixon. In fact, even in a little-known memoir of Jerry Voorhees, he says, I hear that there's an investment banker from back east who's out here looking for a candidate to run against me. He doesn't say the name, and what I say in Family of Secrets is that that investment banker was Prescott Bush.
Wow.
And so what we have is we have Richard Nixon chosen, handpicked by Prescott Bush, and of course this explains a lot. And if you look in the photo gallery here in Family of Secrets, you'll see a picture of Richard Nixon with
I
Prescott
love the photos,
Bush.
by the way.
But these pictures really, you know, they talk about, a picture, is good for 1,000 words. If you look at this, is worth 1,000 words. This picture of these two guys together, Richard Nixon with Prescott Bush, but it's very, very clear. Where is this picture? Who's in charge? There you go. Look at this picture on the right there. Top right.
Yes, it is clear. It looks like Daddy.
You're right. Prescott Bush is towering over Richard Nixon, and he's installing a Panama hat on Nixon's head, and
Yeah.
Nixon looks embarrassed, and he has this sort of embarrassed grin on his face.
Right, right.
And, that's the way it was. Prescott Bush was calling the shots, and so they basically propelled Richard Nixon into politics, got him into the U.S. Senate, and then when a group of these people basically...